Hey everyone, Laura Brown here. I hope you're doing amazing. Thanks so much for joining me for this presentation. We are talking a little bit about client faux pas. So, whether you are a provider and a client, which I think most of us are, or if you are simply a client of an intuitive provider, these are the faux pas that are sometimes committed by us clients, and they don't really land very well. So, today in this video, we're going over these faux pas and the essential course corrections so we can build stronger transformational relationships. So, what we're covering today are these faux pas that, in my 2 decades of experience, I've come into contact with, that I've experienced. And trust me, I have seen and heard it all. There's definitely some pretty glaring, pretty large faux pas that can and do sink or tank a relationship that we're building or have with an intuitive provider. So, what we're covering today are why these certain parameters, these things that, these faux pas, if you will, why they matter, what these major faux pas are, and then, of course, what we can do to course correct. What can we do to make some changes so we're building stronger transformational relationships? So, first off, why does this matter? Okay. So, most of these faux pas, they are things that, you know, we don't really necessarily want to acknowledge that we do because there's a certain level of entitlement, maybe a certain level of rudeness, disrespect that is inherent with some of these faux pas. But we've all committed them, right? We've all slid into this behavior in many different relationships, but in a lot of times, and in this context, with our intuitive providers. The thing is that if we don't like to acknowledge that we are doing these things, that we have we have it within us to do them, we don't have any awareness around them. So, by covering this stuff today, we are working to build some conscious awareness, which ultimately leads to empowered change. If we aren't aware we're doing something, we're hopeless to be able to create any kind of positive change. And all of these changes, all of this awareness, it's designed to build more respectful, equitable, and enriched relationships with our providers. Okay. One of the things that is very important in these transformational relationships is that everybody, both you, the client or the receiver, and your provider, feel safe. They feel respected. They feel validated. They feel that there's an equity. There's what's the word I'm looking for? Equity that is inherent with the relationship. When that is not there, then there's going to be a feeling of disrespect, a feeling that they can't really um, truly unfold and flourish, especially for a provider opening their channels, fully have presence, because there's this feeling of this is somebody who disrespects my time. This is somebody who doesn't value what it is that I do. And while it's very easy to say that we do, I value you, I value your wisdom, I value your, your time, etc. Again, we've heard the saying that talk is cheap, right? So if we're saying one thing, but yet our actions are sending a completely different message, then it's going to be the actions and that message that really lands. And that really tanks our relationship with our providers. And we can't really experience and receive the full enrichment and benefit of these transformational relationships when that happens. So, the other reason why this matters is that we want to expect more of ourselves and those around us, and to ultimately inspire also the best within ourselves and others. So if we begin to see and acknowledge that, yep, I've done this, yep, I do that, and we create conscious change, by doing that, we are expecting and kind of raising the bar in terms of how we want to show up in these relationships. And in a lot of ways, with these parameters, with these faux pas and the changes we make, we are then we're expecting and holding our providers to a higher standard. And this is inspirational. It inspires you to show up as your best. It inspires your provider to show up as their best. And I feel like this is something that we want to really aspire to do in any context, is to really expect the best of ourselves and others, and to let that also serve as inspiration for ourselves and others to show up as that better, more aware, conscious version of ourselves. The one thing I do want to make very clear where this is concerned, there is no shame in this game. Okay. These mistakes, these faux pas, they're pretty standard. And we're all guilty of at least one, if not all. So this isn't about calling out anyone. It's not about creating, this sort of finger pointing thing. It is simply about raising awareness that is needed to create change that ultimately builds stronger transformational relationships with our providers. All right, so let's get into our first faux pas. We want to be clear, okay? Speak up or miss out. If you have a specific question or concern and just dance around it rather than voicing it, expect to be disappointed more often than not. Most of the unfavorable feedback that I've received over the years is when a client felt that a question or concern that was never disclosed to me wasn't addressed fully. And in situations like that, we have to assess, well, why is it that I didn't make that question? Why didn't I state that question clearly? Why didn't I just ask it? Why didn't I just state what my concern is? And a lot of times that withholding is sort of this litmus test for legitimacy. We have this notion of, well, I'm not supposed to tell them my question. I'm not supposed to give them any information. That is kind of an old school and, dare I say, bullshit ideology. Number one, we need to acknowledge that our providers do not have a microscope that dissects the present, or telescopes that can reveal every facet of your past and the future. Okay, there's also this notion of relevance. Sure, let's say that you are with the best damn, intuitive provider. How are they going to know what is most relevant to you? Do you really want them to filter through 10,000 things that is of absolute no relevance to you, while you wait for some sort of sign as to whether or not they're a legitimate reader? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I'll be the first to admit, and I'm not ashamed or humble about it, I'm a damn good reader. I can pick up on a good number of things that the client never divulged. I can hone in on the situation with stunning accuracy, but I cannot see everything. And who's to say that what is coming through to me, which I'll always divulge, whether it's pertaining to the question or not, that's just part of what I feel ethically to my guides I have to do. But who's to say that what is coming through is really what, the client wants to hone in on? It's up to you to make it clear what it is that you need insight or healing or guidance around. That question, your major concern, be out with it. Don't withhold it as this sort of litmus test to gauge whether or not they're legitimate, if they're the real deal. It's actually on you, the client, to do the legwork to learn more about your provider. And we'll cover some different ways that you can do that in a later segment here. Okay, so next, this is a big one for me, and I'm sure a lot of my providers will say it's a big one for them as well. But we don't want to treat our providers like a magic 8 ball. So you don't want to ask your provider to lend you their wisdom or gifts for free. There needs to always be an exchange. We don't want to be texting or emailing or calling or whatever saying, "Hey, this is what's going on. Can you look into this real quick?" Nothing super deep. Can you just kind of give me cliff notes? Can you just look at it and tell me what I need to know? Firstly, again, there's just such an element of rudeness and entitlement when we do that. Your provider is not there to be at your beck and call. Secondly, your providers have their process so that they're capable of showing up fully for you. Whether it's to meditate, whether they cleanse their space, whether they do their Akashic prayer, whatever it may be. It's their process that they go through so that when they show up for you, it is of the highest caliber. They are completely ready to provide you their unencumbered, total level of presence and attention. And, it really denotes that they take what they're doing for you very seriously. The notion that you can just kind of shake them up like those old magic 8 balls, and then they can give you this canned response that doesn't really fall into that category of expecting the best and the most of your providers or of yourself. You don't want to just get some 2-second shitty reply. You want the real deal, but you also want to show that you respect your provider by not just blasting them every time something happens and expect them to be there like a magic 8 ball, giving you a response or insight or guidance or whatever. When we do that, it is very much an indicator of taking advantage of your provider and their time and their gifts. And even though you, again, may say, oh, I appreciate it. Thank you for your help. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for taking the time. Again, that's very kind of you to say, but your actions tell an entirely different story, because we wouldn't even be shooting off that message and asking them to do that if there wasn't this underlying sort of assumption that that's what they're there for, and they're not. That's not their job. The next is we want to accept the answer. Okay, you can notice I keep flipping between you and we and what have you. And again, I'm a client just as much as I am a provider, so don't mind me. But we want to accept the answer. And what I mean by this is that there's a lot of times where I will have somebody who gets an answer that they don't really like. I'll use a very simplistic example, such as they come into the session wanting to hear that somebody is coming back to them, and they don't like the answer that they are given. And so they will ask the same question in several different ways, sort of trying to elicit a different response. It's very insulting to your provider to do that. And most importantly, it's insulting to you. You don't want to come into a session with this expectation of what the truth is. It's always great. And I always say that a lot of times a reading is going to confirm what your own intuition is already telling you. But there are those times where we really are grasping to something where that's not the case. It's the reality of the way things are flowing isn't in the vision or the idea that we may have coming into the session. So it's important that we be willing to accept the answer, to accept the truth as it is coming through in that session, even if it's an uncomfortable truth, even if we don't like the answer. We don't want to try to provoke a more palatable truth or response from our providers. We want to also respect our providers' time. There are two main ways that a provider's time is often taken advantage of. And one of those is taking up time outside of the container of the session, and the other is taking a session well beyond the time that that session was supposed to end. So when we purchase a service or a package of services, this does not mean that now it grants you open access to your provider. If you have a question or concern outside of the session, it's appropriate to book additional time and make the proper exchange. Likewise, if you purchase a 60-minute session, you don't want to keep that provider for 70 plus minutes. Even saying things like, I know we're past time, but There's no but to that statement. You know, the acknowledgement that you know it's past time followed by a but tells me that you really don't care who I may have to attend to after that session, whether it's another client, whether it is my family, whether it is, an appointment to get my nails done. It's clear that you feel that whatever you want to share or whatever additional questions you have or whatever it may be, that you perceive that as being more important than whomever or whatever I have an obligation to, a duty to outside of our session. So, when we are looking on to this next part, we want to acknowledge that we do the work. So, when you come into a session with your provider, and you say are coming in after already having a healing and there were calls to action given, or maybe there was um, a reading that gave you some very practical tips on what to do, what not to do, or an intuitive coaching session where you had some homework, and you come into that session having not done any of those things, and in some cases maybe even done the opposite. It really can kill the integrity of the session. So those who provide their gifts and wisdom, they typically do so because they have a desire to help others. And while some may care less if you do the work, a quality provider, coming back to that notion of knowing you deserve the absolute best and expecting the best of yourself and of your providers, a quality provider is going to find it very insulting and a waste of everyone's time if you're not doing the work. Even if you're comfortable with the notion of making an exchange and not doing the work, your provider, if they're ethical and integrous, they're not. They're not going to be okay with taking your money and you're not doing the work, because ultimately we're only as efficient and good at our work as you are yours. Most of these connections, whether it's a reading, healing, coaching session, all of the above, they're not, sort of this hierarchy. They're not a dictatorship. They're a democracy. They're a collaboration. They're a partnership. And so when you're not doing the work, then you're not going to reap the benefits that they told you you would. But they also can't wave a magic wand and suddenly erase all of the obstacles in your path, all of the issues that you may be facing or that have held you back from your desired result or your desired experience without you doing the work. You have to do the work. So it's important to understand that there's a lot that's on the line. A provider creates, their framework, they create their process, and they provide you with the things to do, the steps to do, the things not to do, knowing that that's the insight, that's part of the framework that is going to take you step by step to your desired goal, your desired destination. But if you don't, in the day to day, take heed and follow that insight, follow that guidance, refrain from those don'ts, you're not going to get to that destination. And there's no amount of pushing or magic wand waving on the behalf of your provider that is going to change that. So now we're going to cover a few course corrections. Now, again, we're all guilty of these faux pas. We've all done them. I can honestly say that I've done every single one of these, and probably others that I haven't even covered here. Um, and again, the whole notion is we want to create some change, and to help you and myself make some of these changes, there's some course corrections, that we can create once we're aware that we may have had some inappropriate or total lack of boundaries around our interaction with our providers. So, first and foremost, we want to do the legwork. There are many ways that we can help ourselves feel more confident when we choose who it is that we're going to consult. They do require a little bit of legwork, but they're well worth the effort. And some of the suggestions that I have here is, number one, if you're considering purchasing a service or a package or whatever it may be, take a look at the provider's socials, read their posts, go over and look at their blog. What are they sharing? What's the language that they use? Does it land with you? Does it feel good in your body? Look at their credentials and their training. Most of us will have that on our about page. And I know that there's some people who can be one way or the other where training and credentials are concerned, but I happen to lean very heavily on the side of training and credentials really matter. I'm a very big advocate of getting trained, of having certificates, of having, credentials of some sort, because it really speaks to the level of commitment and devotion that we as providers have to our art, to the service that we're providing. I happen to believe and come from the school of thought that each one of us are incredibly, intuitive psychic beings. And whether your psychic muscle is strong or weak is, really irrelevant. We all have that capacity, and it comes out, in its various ways. So having that ability in and of itself, in my opinion, isn't really enough. It doesn't really tell me why I should rely on your intuitive abilities more so than my own. What makes you, at a level that you can charge and be considered a quote unquote professional and not myself? And what really distinguishes that are the trainings and the education and the certifications and the credentials that that person has amassed in and built over their years of experience, because that tells me that you have something more than I may have. Being that I'm an intuitive ability, an intuitive person, but I don't train, I don't have any of those things. That lets me know that, okay, well, you do, and you have a framework, you have, a process, you have the training and the wisdom and the experience and the credentials to back up why it is that I should exchange my funds for receiving your wisdom instead of just relying on my own. We also want to take a look at those that they may be connected with. Do you know any of the people, whether it's other professionals or maybe other people that follow them, just regular, non-intuitive providers that follow them? If you do, and you know them, or you at least are familiar with them, you may want to reach out and hear what they have to say. All of these things together give you a better idea as to, one, the potential legitimacy, but also whether this person is the right person for you. No matter how right, or I'm sorry, no matter how professional or good at their craft somebody may be, they still may not be the right person for you. And so it's important to do a little legwork to make sure that both of those are solid with you. Next, we want to show them that we value them, okay? Asking for something you didn't pay for, with the understanding that paying for a session doesn't grant you anything beyond that session, is just simply wrong. There's no other way to put it. There's no other softer way to put it. But you can show you value your provider, their time, and their gifts by asking them about their policies. What is their policy for support outside of a session? Do they offer so much of it? Do they offer certain things and not others? Ask if they have any options for mini sessions for emergencies. And by all means, please, please, please keep sessions at their time. Ask if you can set aside maybe the first 10 to 15 minutes or the last 10 to 15 minutes for any wrap up or, questions that you may have. If you have an update, if there's been a lot that's gone on, or if you just want to maximize the time, ask your provider if they're okay with receiving an email before a session that includes all that. But when you don't think of these things and, have that cognizance around the ways in which you are either honoring or maybe dishonoring somebody else's time, you run the risk of um of tanking that relationship, and you run the risk of really, having all of a sudden this scramble at the end of the session, where now it goes from being 60 minutes to 65 to 70 to whatever. And a lot of providers, they don't mind if a session has sort of a soft ending. If it goes a few minutes over, most providers aren't really going to balk at that. But I can say from experience that there's times where, short of literally hanging up on a session, there's no way for me to eloquently or safely, wrap things up, because it's just one thing after another. And depending on the provider, it can be a very uncomfortable experience, because we all show up with our own insecurities that we're working on and our own comfortabilities like anybody else. And so it's very important that we keep in mind that when we can honor somebody else's time and they can honor ours, everybody's going to feel like that this is an equitable exchange, an equitable experience. And lastly, we want to know what our motivation is. Okay. So when we go into a session, we only want to reach out and book that session when we know we're ready for the full experience, when we're ready for the truth, when we're ready to do the work. If you're not sure, for example, about something, whether it's insight provided, whether it's the things that they ask you to do that's going to help you, or the things that they tell you or suggest rather not to do, or the work that they say, okay, before the next session, I want you to do XYZ. If you are unsure about any of that, ask. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm not quite sure on this. Is this what you mean? Is that what you mean? You know, be clear until you're not, and if you're not, then ask a question. And if you need support to integrate something that you've learned, again, ask for it. If you've been given a set of tasks to do between sessions and you find yourself struggling, or you don't have the time, reach out and say, I'm struggling with this piece. Do you have any suggestions on what I can do? Or, you know what, I've had a really busy week. I'm struggling to do all of these things. Should I just focus on one, or is maybe doing a little bit of each and getting them started appropriate? Things like that, typically your provider wants to know, so that they can tweak things, that they can maybe assign, if you will, quote unquote, less, or that maybe, they can give you a few tips on what you should do or can do in between now and then, or how you can maybe break through some sort of obstacle that's getting in your way. Most of them will have no issue with providing that. You just have to be willing to ask for it. So, thank you first and foremost for being here. I know it's been, almost 30 minutes, and I appreciate you, as I assume clients, coming in and taking a little bit of time to listen to this, to learn about these different faux pas and how they may land with your providers. This is really an important aspect around how we interact and how we can build the strongest transformational relationships, because I've had really, really powerful experiences with clients, and they've always have been when these particular faux pas have instead become boundaries, boundaries that I uphold, and boundaries that my clients are willing to respect. And that's where I've had the most transformative experiences, and I've seen the greatest transformations take place. And without these boundaries, either as a provider laying them down and really advocating for them, or a client and respecting them, we we diminish the capacity for change. We diminish the transformational component of these relationships. And frankly, it can result in a loss of hard-earned money. If you're going to exchange your funds for a session with a provider or a series of sessions, you want to get the most out of that, which means that we have to have awareness of our actions and how they land, and we have to have an emphasis on doing everything that we can to, doing our part, especially to build and to strengthen these transformational relationships. So I really want to just say I appreciate you and I thank you. And I welcome your questions or your comments. I want to hear what you think. Are there some of these that you see yourself in? Do you have, anything to add? I definitely want to hear from you and offer what I can. So feel free to comment below. Feel free to get in touch with me. I welcome both of those. So thank you again. I love each and every single one of you, and I can't wait to talk further. Mwah. Have a great day.